Of years ago, probably 20 now, a horrible skiing avalanche accident in Northern California. It was that time in spring where the snow is still there and deep, but the melting happens, and there was a kind of rumbling, and a skier was buried in the snow. And the search teams went out but couldn't find him, and they couldn't get too close because there was still the threat of more avalanche activity. And so they sent up choppers and sent out ski patrols, and the weather got so bad that they had to abandon the search for a day and a half. And then they went back. The third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. And they were on the verge of making that rescue mission a recovery operation. But on the seventh day, they saw sticking out of the ground a ski pole. And digging in, they pulled the young man out of the snow. He'd been there for a week, and he was in very bad shape, but he was alive. And they airlifted him to the hospital. And he had one surgery, and then two, and then three. And he lingered into a fourth day, a fifth day, a sixth day. And at the end of a week in the hospital, he died. As they often do, the news reporters of the town that was his hometown went to talk to his parents. They were divorced, so they carried on two separate interviews. And in their wonderful way of news media, stuck a microphone under the father's nose and said, "How are you feeling today?" They didn't expect him to be as honest as he was. He said, "I hate God with every nerve in my body, with every fiber of my being, and I think that if I ever get a chance to meet him face to face, I will spit in his eye and tell him how I hate him for taking my son. And not only for taking my son, but the way in which he did it, for bringing all of our hopes back up and then taking his life. I will hate him for the rest of this life and any life I have after that." Gulp. So the same team then went and interviewed the mother and said, "We want to know what you're thinking, and we're very sorry for your loss." And she said, "I want to tell you that for the rest of my life, I will live thanking God for this gift." She said, "For the first week that he was lost, we prayed and fasted and asked God that even for a moment, we could have him back. Even for a second, we could touch his hand. Even for a moment to look him in the eye." And that week was not what we would have asked, the way we would have set it up. But I had my son again for 7 more days. And for the rest of this life and my eternal life, I will be grateful to this loving, caring Creator God. It's the same story. It's the same event. It's the same family. The difference is probably the fulcrum point of what is being talked about in 1 John. One way to begin to think about the love of God is just to recite what someone tells you. God is love, love is God, God loves me, I love God. It becomes kind of like a laundry list or a chronology. It's now 9:38 on a Sunday morning. You say it, you state it, it has some kind of existence because with words you've brought it into being, but it doesn't mean anything. You can't really be that upset with the man in the sense that he had heard those words and didn't have the experience. The mother, obviously, it went beyond being able to recite a laundry list or the kind of ingredients in a recipe. It was for her a reality of relationship. It was that realization that somehow the kind of love those around me deserve and demand, I am incapable of giving. I can't generate enough. I can't care enough. I can't manufacture enough. But if I take a step back and look at this relationship recipe from 1 John, it's that you do not have the stuff to do it. Until you recognize and accept the love that comes from God, and then you can reflect it. And then you can go to that well. And then you can say, I can give you a little bit because I've experienced it. I know what it is because I've been there. And the laying out for the community is to realize in all of that kind of transition is to say, we have love, but it's given to us. We cannot manufacture love, but we can reflect it. We cannot invent love, but we can share it. And sometimes that's the only hope that we have. So I decided today to think about what it means in relationship of family, in relationship of my life as a father, to be a prodigal parent. Now, you probably don't use, I don't either, the word prodigal a whole lot in our regular everyday vocabulary. What a very prodigal thing of you to do. It just doesn't come out that way. And in fact, we mostly don't know what the word means because it's bad somehow. Right? I mean, we know the story, this guy that went off and blew all his money in Las Vegas and then ended up living in a pigsty somewhere in Iowa or I don't know where. And he was the prodigal. So if that's him, I'm out. I don't want to be prodigal. It's sometimes used as a noun, not very often, more as an adjective. But one of the definitions of prodigal as a noun is a recklessly extravagant consumer. So we could be like the prodigal nation, I'm thinking, the way it is. A recklessly extravagant consumer. But the adjective means overly generous, lavish. And here's a word that even if you don't know what it is, you're going to know what it means. Munificent. It means taking part in something, giving or consuming in that way, in something that's way out of whack with the standard. So the son was prodigal because he spent all of his dad's money and then wanted more. And he wasted all of those resources when society said, here's what you ought to do. But the reality is, the truest prodigal in the story is the father, whose love was, let's just say it, munificent. He gave him the money, and when he crawled back, gave him the ring and the banquet, much more than what he should have. Much more munificent than what this child deserved. So here are the 2 points today for relationships in God's kingdom, for relationships as children and parents. One is to say, I haven't got enough love. I haven't got as much as you need. It's not deep enough for you to swim in, but I know where to point you for that love. And I can let some reflect through me. I have a deep and infinite well of resource for that love. And I'm going to take you to it. And I'm going to let you bathe in it. And I'm going to baptize you all the way from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet in it. And it's tricky. I used to do kind of parenting classes. There's one in the bulletin that's coming up. I used to do those until my first kid hit 13. I don't do that anymore. I spend all of my time teaching myself. Remember when you said, but one of the things that comes back to me that I spent a lot of time with parents on was, okay, you are going to have in your parenting options the two poles, and you should always resist the temptation to take them. The one pole is to do this, to say, I love you, so I guess I have to love all the crap that you're dealing. Or to say, I don't like that crap, so I don't like you. I try not to enact those, but I've felt both of those. Sometimes with some of you. And I'm sure the feeling is mutual. Okay? There'll be a testimonial time afterwards, and we'll have a mic and you can come down. But the real part of that relationship that we're taught is to say, that's got to stop. But I love you very much. This is hard work right here. This makes you feel guilty, but you can do it. This makes you feel like a doormat, but you say, well, I've got to keep loving. As soon as I get those footprints off my back, I'm going to lay down and do it again. That's not it. It's this. Stop that. But I still love you. I love you, but I don't love that. It's that kind of relationship in the kingdom that says, how can I do this, but to say I get both from God? God gives us all the behavioral guidelines, the attitudinal, discussional forums, but God keeps doing this over and over and over. 3 Sundays ago, we had an overflowing toilet in the women's room, and so between services, people caught me running in there, knocking on the door with a mop. Last week, we had a speaker blowout back here, and so I came in with a toolbox between worship, and somebody said, what is your job description around here anyway? And I said, well, I just happened to be in that spot. But I got thinking about toolboxes after that, and I just wanted to share with you a little bit my parenting toolbox that's so much different now than it used to be. And my toolbox is an adjustable wrench. Now, growing up, I used to call these Crescent wrenches because Crescent was the company that made the first ones, I think. I learned my lesson, though, because in shop class, I remember this, I was like 11th or 12th grade, and I was laying underneath a car trying to get the plug out of my friend's oil pan because it was stripped and rusted, which is hard to do at the same time, but we were trying to get it out. So I'm laying down like this, and our teacher, our shop teacher was always, you know all of these tools and use the right names. So I'm laying down there, and I said, hey, Steve, would you give me a wrench? And he came over, Mr. Haapalainen. This is Mr. Siriano. He's an Italian guy. Mr. Haapalainen, what kind of wrench do you want? I said, Mr. Siriano, it doesn't matter because I'm going to use it like a hammer under here. So I just need one that I can get a good whack at it. I got a C+. But an adjustable wrench is in my toolbox because you have to, in relationship stuff, be flexible and adaptable. And I like to say you always have to be ready because you never know what size nut you're going to be working with. This is the one that I've added over the years. Every year I realize more and more how imperfect I am. And I make a lot of messes. And I can't always go back and fix them. But I can clean them up because they're my messes. Didn't have this in my toolbox a few years ago. Also got this, an extension cord. Because in relationships, especially as a father, you got to stretch from what is to what should be, from what somebody else wants to what you want, from what everybody needs, and what everybody needs is connection. We're almost done, so hang on. And then, whatever kind it is, pliers, because sometimes all you can do is hang on. The only thing you can accomplish is to not lose your grip. And the last one, this in some form has always been in my toolbox, but it's changed its composition over the years. It's rubber now. Because you still have to learn to be persuasive without doing any damage. So that's my toolbox. And part of it came to me from these little instructions, life's little instruction book called Proverbs. The first one, my child, listen when your father corrects you. I want to put this one and paint it on the wall, but Jeannie wouldn't let me. Listen, my child, when your father corrects you, and don't neglect your mother's instruction. And this one, my children, pay attention and learn good judgment from your father. That's not an emphasis there. I just bolded it myself. So this prodigal kind of love, that I can be munificent in giving because I've connected myself to the unending source. That's what it's about. I want to close by telling you a story. I thought about reading it because I've stolen it directly from a book called What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey. But I'd rather tell it, so it won't be exactly right, but it'll be my version. If you want the right one, it's in the book. This is about a girl from Traverse City, Michigan. Now, in case you want to know, Traverse City is right about here, and I'm from right about here. So that's what we do in Michigan. It's not really creative, but we've always got our map with us. Traverse City is known for pretty much rich Wisconsinites and people from Chicago and Indiana who have homes up there. It's also known for cherries and cherry blossoms, and it's a beautiful little wayside place. This girl grew up in Traverse City, and somewhere along the line, the relationship in the family turned. They didn't like her tattoos or her piercings or her music. They didn't like her clothes. And she, in turn, learned to not like them. And so after one day, a particularly bad argument, she went and slammed the door in her room. And her father came and knocked on the door, and she said, "Get away. I don't ever want to see you. I hate you." And she enacted a plan that she had been scheming about for many months. In a secret place in her room was an envelope with money. She went out her bedroom window and bought a bus ticket to Detroit. Because she knew people get lost in Detroit all the time, and she wanted to get lost where her parents would never find her. The first couple days after the money ran out were really tough. And then she met this charismatic, nice guy that everybody called Boss. And he gave her some pills that made her feel better, or at least not feel anything at all. And he taught her how to please people, especially men. And he was very, very nice to her for a year, maybe 2 years. And then she got sick. Not terminally sick, but sick and in need of medical attention. And she was amazed at how mean he became, how brutal he was. And so she ran from him and lived on the streets in Detroit. And finally, after too much to bear and too little resources to put to work on it, she called home and got the answering machine and hung up. And then she called a second time and hung up. And the third time she called, she said, I want to come home if there's still a home for me. I'm leaving tomorrow on the bus for Traverse City. If I can come home and live in my room, would you please be at the bus station? If not, I'm going to keep on riding because the bus goes eventually to Canada. And while she was going home on the bus, she thought about things she hadn't thought of in a long time. The smell of cherry blossoms, a golden Labrador retriever. And when they made the turn out of the last city lights, she remembered how dark it is outside of Traverse City. And about 10:30 at night, the bus pulled into the terminal. And she got out to use the bathroom. And she looked over to the side, and there were 40 people wearing stupid party hats, blowing noisemakers, and there was a sign that said, "Welcome home." And it was her uncle and her cousin and the old grumpy guy from across the street who she hated and thought he hated her, and her friends from school. And out of the crowd came her father. And she started the speech she had been rehearsing since Lansing. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. And he said, we can't talk now because the house is all set up for the party and the food is getting cold. We'll talk later. The curse that Malachi talks about, it seems to me, is the curse of not having the fathers and the mothers' hearts turned to their children and the children turning to their parents. Do they deserve it, one or the other? Probably not. It's just plain and simple munificence. Amen. Let us give to Christ's church and its work in the world.